Good evening, everyone, in Reading 370. This is Dr. Slay, and I'm here to present material for week 3 in our class. I want to begin with an apology. I got terribly behind this week. I have had a major deadline for something professional that I am working on, and consequently, I got a little bit behind in getting things posted for this week's class, and I think it's all due this weekend. So after that, life will get smoother and I won't be behind anymore. That said, I'm going to make a few adjustments to our schedule to see if I can engage some of you a little bit more in some of our online opportunities. So let me get started with sharing the screen. It should be, no, I'm not sharing quite yet. So let me get that up and open. Let's see, where does it say share? Right there. Green button, share, desktop 1. Yippee skippy, I should have it open. And so now I'm going to be looking at desktop 1. Let me get this other screen back. Here we go. Let me pull it over to the right side so that I'm not staring, you're not staring, looking at my ears. And we'll move forward from there. Okay, so here we go. We are in week 3 and you should be looking at the home page that you would see when you're pulling it up. So I'm going to open it up to week 3 and I'm going to actually go to content because that'll take us to the home page first. Week 3, here we go. So let's talk a little bit about the work that we're going to be doing today. First of all, I want to let you know that I did grade the assignment that you did on presenting your literacy history. It was wonderful. I really enjoyed learning more about you as writers, and that is a pre-assessment on your writing abilities and what you bring to the table as writers. That's something that I would encourage you to do with your students, is getting them to write often. You learn a lot about who you have in your class. And know how to work with them moving forward. So writing is a tremendous assessing tool for both reading and writing. You'll learn that in Reading 360 when you use writing to assess students' reading abilities. We'll talk a little bit about that perhaps later on as well, but I know that's a big topic in Reading 360. I'm also going to change our office hours. What I've noticed over the last few weeks is that no one has logged in when I've done the recordings or even during the office hours. So that suggests to me that maybe this isn't a good time. So I'm going to, start by trying to get things posted before time, before our Wednesday sessions. But I do the live session mainly so that you can be a part of it when I'm presenting and allow you to engage with the content and as well as be able to ask questions that might inform other people. But again, it is not required. And if you have a time that you think would be a better time for me to do the live sessions, please send me an email so that I can consider everyone in the decisions that we make for the class. Secondly, I'm going to have the office hours be by request. So instead of having a static time, you let me know when you need me. I am going to be sending out a survey next week to I try to do a check-in, and I'm going to be asking to meet with you either in small groups or individually or somehow communicate with each one of you, because I really value that sense of community, which is our topic this week, to be able to understand who you are and what you need so I can serve you best. So that's what I want to do moving forward in our class, to keep everybody on point and to get to know each one of you a little bit better. And to meet your needs. So this week's content is chapter 3 in the writing workshop text and chapter 1 in the guided reading book. So chapter 3 in this book and chapter 1 in this book. So what I'm going to tell you too is that we're going to be reading chapter 1 and maybe one more chapter together. The rest of the chapters are going to be ones that we're going to jigsaw. So you're not going to read this whole book in its entirety in the same way that I'm expecting you to read this book. Because each of the bulk of this book are strategies and understandings of different levels of reading that you're going to need to be familiar with as you are teaching reading in your classroom. So you'll begin to see, if you look at the page 3 on the table of contents, chapter 1 is about guided reading essentials, which is what we're going to be reading this week. But then chapter 2 goes into pre-A readers. The emergent reader is chapter 3. The early reader is chapter 4. Chapter 5 is the transitional reader. Chapter 6 is the fluent reader. And then chapter 7 is about reading comprehension. So chapter 7 is probably one that we will all read together. Chapter 1 we will all read together. But chapters 2 through 6 you will jigsaw and work on presenting to the class in small groups. Now, I'm not ready to shape those groups, but I will be asking you to identify where you prefer to be next week. So after reading chapter 1, what I do want you to do is to peruse the rest of the book and see, well, which one of those groups do you think fits your interests and where you think you might land as a teacher, chapters 2 through 6. So that's what you're going to be doing in this particular, in the Richardson text. The rest of our work this week is going to be discussions and preparing to start our blog post, which will be our work for next week as well. So, but I do have a review of the writer's workshop that I want to present to you. And I'll be posting this video, which will be a narrated version of this PowerPoint that I'm about to show you. So let's go ahead and get started with that right away. So let me go ahead and try to show the slideshow. I want to make sure, I'm going to check right here to make sure that you are actually looking at this. Nope, you're not seeing it quite yet. So let me make an adjustment because I don't think, I'm going to, goodness. I'm going to stop sharing for just a minute and I'll be right back. I want to make sure that you are seeing what you need to see. So let me try that one more time. Stop share, start share, and I don't see it on here. Oh, there it is. That's the why. It was on a different screen. Now you're seeing what I want you to see. Excellent. Okay, so this is a review. Chapter 1, if you recall, talked about what the writer's workshop is. When I talk about what are your beliefs about writing, I want you to recognize that writing instruction and how we teach anything, whether you're teaching reading or whether you're teaching writing, your pedagogy, it's what we call is your beliefs and your practices about writing. So what you believe about how writing should be taught, about what writing is, and how children learn about writing is essential to you becoming a writing teacher. So that's something you're going to be thinking about and writing about at the very end of the course. So take notes for yourself as you're going through this. What do you value in writing instruction? You all wrote about how you learned to read. Some of you touched upon the writing piece. But today when we talk about community, that's probably going to tie into what you value about how writing is taught. We're not in a group, so we can't talk about that, which is why I really like to have these live sessions, have a few people so that we can have a chance to discuss this together in class. It's usually far more productive. And it's less work for you because if you are in class and you are here for the live sessions, then I can probably eliminate some of the things you have to do in offline discussion posts. But that didn't work out for the tonight session because I'm guilty of being late myself. So let's review some of the steps in the writing process. I want you to remember, see these images that we have on the side. You probably remember in school learning, having graphic organizers. Sometimes I used to call those thinking maps. There's two different kinds. This one's very linear. You have a topic and then you have your paragraphs and you have your details down and you have a conclusion. So it's a very structured approach to writing. But then you also have another structured approach, and that is to do you have a topic, you have your brain brainstorming here in the middle. This is called a circle map, but then you can also put a frame of reference around that circle map and talk about it. This is a thinking map. This is your traditional graphic organizer. So then you put frames of reference, like maybe whose perspective, the different characters, or maybe characters. Maybe here you have setting, maybe you have the problems, and maybe here you have the solution, that are all part of you shaping and framing your story. So we do these organizers for reading, and we do them for teaching writing, because remember, reading is the inhale. We read, we learn from looking at students at mentor texts. We read a book, we understand what that book was about. We look at the writer's process, we look at the writer's craft, we consider the topic, we consider the purpose for writing. Why did the author write this? We consider the audience. Who's this best story best set for? The type of writing, which would be the genre. And then we consider how we're going to take all of what we just gathered from inhaling and turn it into something that is not only inspires us, but how can we use what we learned from that writing example to create our own writing. So that's the first step, is called pre-writing. Usually we use some sort of a structured approach, or maybe different ways to brainstorm and get our ideas started. Somebody mentioned in one of their initial pieces of writing that they really struggled in school to know what to write about. You're not alone. If you wrote that, you are not alone. I bet there's a lot of people would say, I never knew how to get started. For me, it's one of the hardest things, even though I'm a seasoned writer now. Sometimes I write and write and write all kinds of stuff, and before I'm able to actually get my own piece of writing started and know where to go. But we have tricks to do that. We can take students through, if you're using a writer's notebook, you help students learn how to do some brainstorming way ahead of time, so that they always know where to turn back in their page to be able to find inspiration for writing. But it's a big step. It is said that about 80% of writing is in this pre-writing stage, and it's pre-writing. So that means there's a lot going on in the drafting. Here's where you write your draft. You write your leads, you do things, you rework it and work it and rework it to emphasize the content and not the conventions, which is your periods and your capital letters and your correct spelling. I'm not saying those things aren't important, but drafting is just getting what's in your head on paper. So sometimes it's really messy and it doesn't look good, it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't work quite right. And you'll think there's lots of things that are wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a beginning place. But if you don't get the ideas on paper, you cannot proceed and you can't move to the next step, which is revising. I call this revisioning, because this is where you have a chance to go back and look at your writing again from a different lens. You've stepped away from it. Maybe it's a day later. I told you I had a big professional deadline coming up, and I have been writing deeply. All of this represents all of that writing that I have been working on. And I have also a trash can over here full of all of the pieces that I have written, tossed away, written because I made a copy and I printed it because I saw it on paper. I saw it on the screen, but then I had to step away and I printed it, and then I reread it. And then I thought, I have too many versions. So I threw away a lot of the old versions, which I have in my computer still, but so I wouldn't get confused. So the point is that this is where you get to take a fresh look at your writing later, sometimes even a day or two later, because you want to sleep in between versions of it, because your brain truly begins to recognize it reads what you want it to read and not what's actually on the paper. Our brains trick us that way. It's where you add information, you move information around. You might take out information. Oh, I've done a lot of removing because I ramble. And so when I write, I have to tighten up my writing and think, what am I really trying to say? And do I need these words? Is it wordy? And sometimes I substitute with better vocabulary or some metaphors or some writing craft tools that I've learned how to use in some of the mini lessons. Sometimes this is a place where we share our drafts and revising groups. we participate constructively in discussion groups that help us to see our writing. It's not criticism, it's meant to help us advance as writers. And so that's a whole practice that we have to teach our kids how to do. How do you become a peer reviewer? How do you talk to kids about your writing? You have to model this for them. You make changes to reflect in the group suggestions, and you make changes beyond just the words. It's all about ideas and voice. What do we mean by voice? Voice is that personality that you bring to writing. It's the writer's voice and the message and how they want to portray. Do they want an angry voice, a humorous voice, an informative voice? Are they trying to be sarcastic? Are they trying to be serious, or are they just having fun? Well, once you've gotten through all of that, you move into what's called the editing stage, which sets aside where you again set your drafts aside. So you know it's a process, it takes time. So you might have a whole lot of drafts going on. And as you can see, well, in some of my, I don't have a whole lot of writing on this copy, but this is the old days. You had actual editing marks this is pre-computer, where you would have these codes that were meant to add something, take something out, move something around. Sometimes we use that. I used to actually teach that stuff to my kids, but I don't do that so much anymore because computers have allowed us to delete, copy, paste, and all of that sort of thing. So it's not quite so important. And I want you to also recognize that we kind of merge and get our editing and revising stages kind of a little bit mixed up, because editing is really meant for cleaning up and finding errors. It's the proofreading stage. But in reality, guess what? We do editing while we're revising, because you find your own mistakes and you just instinctively fix it. And we know that kids want their writing to be correct. They bring it to you, say, is this right? And I really try to stay away from that, because it's only right to the writer. Now, we are their teachers, so we're going to try to help them understand look for the meaning in their writing, and help them recognize that the editing, the proofreading, and the conventions help the author write more meaningful messages. Because if you have a run-on sentence, somebody's going to get lost in the writing. So therefore, punctuation really does serve a purpose. So finally, then, of course, you get to the publishing, where publishing looks like, oh, so many different things. Publishing happens every day when a kid maybe reads in a author's chair, or maybe you have finished a draft and you want to celebrate the writer. I've seen teachers take writing and put it into these, what are those, plexiglass types of frames, where it's like an L and it just stands on the table. And kids are so proud to see their writing on their desk or on the teacher's desk, on a bulletin board. Publishing a piece is maybe when you're sending it off to somebody that you meant to write it for. Maybe it was a letter to the principal. It's published when it gets sent off to the principal or to a friend. It's also published when maybe we make a class book out of the collected pieces of writing. So it's really important that when children have an authentic reason to write, a purpose to write other than it's just for the teacher, they are more engaged and they find value in what they're writing. So it's not just enough to simply write, to submit it and say, I'm done, turn it in, because that's when they're going to say, yeah, I'm done. Revising is the hardest step. So when they're writing for authentic purposes, they're more likely to write and get more engaged in their writing for longer periods of time. So what I just showed you was a really simple view of the writing process. I'm not going to click here because I don't want to distract us, but I encourage you, go look at all the posters, go look at what Google says about the writing process. You're going to see steps that fall in line. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, etc., just like I just showed you. But let me tell you, that's not real. Writing is really just not that simple. And I think our authors of this book, The Writing Workshop, tried to convey that. And actually, one of the authors this one, not this one, but the other one, Stacy Schubitz. This is Lynn, but Stacy Schubitz, she has a whole website dedicated to her classroom in writing. And so I encourage you to go check that out. And I want you to recognize this. Let's see if that'll pull up. I want you, here's one of her blog posts. And check out her blog because that's another topic that we're going to be talking about this week is blogging. And I want you to recognize this image right here. Notice the area. We talked about drafting, revising, editing, and publishing, but look at the other steps that she puts into the process. She has collecting and developing. So you collect information, you collect samples of writing, you collect your mentor texts, you collect your ideas. You're constantly on the prowl for things that you're going to write about. That is your pre-writing stage. So pre-writing is more than just, let's write a draft and then we're going to copy it over again and then we've done. And I've seen that in school, so you probably have too. And then at the end, after publishing, well, you reflect. And then you think, well, how did that go? What would I do differently next time? Because, publishing is also saying, okay, it's time, I've worked this piece and it's time for me to push away and maybe I'll work on something new. So that's where the reflection comes in. Well, so what? Now I've published this. What's next? And then you start all over again. Notice the direction of all these arrows. Look, it's a mess. There are arrows that are constantly going back and forth. The writing process is not linear, even though we present it as a linear process. And that really came from researchers way back in the 60s who were looking at how writers write and what they do. And in order to make this a scientific study, they actually described it in a very linear way of this is what writers do. They do this, and then they do this, and they do that. But real writers over time also began to recognize that they do this and that. They go through drafting, which takes them into revising and editing, which then they say, oh, but remember I told you I throw some of those drafts out? I had to start all over again because something wasn't gelling or I wasn't fitting the purpose. It just wasn't right. So I had to draft all over again. And I did an awful lot of reflection within the process of going through this revising and editing. So I think it's really important for you to recognize that writing is not a linear process. And then check out this, but I think this may be where the article came from. So check out her website. I think you'll enjoy it and find it's a useful resource moving forward. So when you go through this, I think it would be when you go through this presentation, let's click on see what this principle says. We may have already seen this. Let me double check.
The writing workshop model is built on students having voice and say. And it truly engages them in the writing process. And we know that the level of engagement and that kids are excited to write about things that they're passionate about, things that they care about, and things that they've experienced. And one of the biggest pieces is that teaching kids that they have stories to tell, teaching kids that they have lots of knowledge to share, and that writing is a very, very useful tool in getting their ideas, the things that they like, the things that they dislike, and all of the things in their life. It's a great way for them to share that with their peers, with other teachers. So I think the fact that the model is built on kids being at the heart and center of their work is really the piece that carries the work from grade level to grade level, and where we see the real excitement around writing.
Now, one of the things that I want you to recognize is that these videos, some of these that I show you, they are coming out of our writing workshop book. I encourage you to click on them and see if you can find them, because it does give you instructions in the book. If you have a digital version, of course, that should be clickable as well. But the keys that I want you to think about is that they really focused on student engagement and the fact that your writing workshop is it's a very child-centered approach to teaching. And that at the end of the day, that's what you're after. That's what TEA is after. That's how you will be evaluated. How student-centered is your instructional practice? And that's part of your beliefs, that you believe that writing should be sent, student driven around the student engagement and writing about things that students are passionate about and things that they are interested in. Those are two very important principles. And those things cannot happen if you don't have a strong community of writers, which again will be another one of our topics today. So let's talk a little bit more about what that literacy workshop looks like. So in order to have a student-driven classroom, you need to have choice and voice. I talked about voice. Voice is that personality. It's you're building a student's capacity to have voice, to have opinions, to have things to say, to be able to express themselves uniquely as in their own. And you teach a lot of that by reading pieces of writing that have strong voice. And you want them to have choice about what they're writing. They need time. I cannot stress that enough. You must build time into your writing workshop every single day. Kids have to write daily. And I'm not talking about writing, filling in a worksheet, or writing to respond to questions. This is time that comes from things that they want to, maybe it's free writing, maybe it's working on a topic that's related to content areas, but it's real writing. The teacher also writes. You're going to see a video in our work this week about the importance of teachers who write alongside their children. And that is hard because a lot of teachers don't see themselves as writing. I also want you to recognize that teaching writing is not the same thing as assigning writing. I can't say that enough. Teaching writing is not assigning writing. You have to model it in mini lessons. You show them the skills and the craft that authors do by studying how authors do it, by reading the literature and showing how the metaphor worked there. And it's different than just saying, add descriptive words here, because they need to see what it looks like. And they need to see you trying to do the same thing in your writing so that they can see you working through the struggles of writing. Writing is the most challenging thing that anyone will do. And it's also the most, puts you in the most vulnerable space because it's very personal and it's easy to feel judged. So you have to build a community so that you feel comfortable sharing and you feel comfortable in your community and know that we're all in this together, which leads to the conferring, and which is where kids get to do a lot of talking and a lot of sharing of their writing in small groups, in groups just between you and the student. But that's the teachable moment. Those teacher conferences, those are the most powerful moments of time, whether it's one-on-one or in small group. That's your power center. And then the periods of focused study. Sometimes you're just working on a genre. Sometimes you're just working on which is what maybe you're just studying how personal narratives work. So you read a lot of personal narratives and all the craft mechanisms that are part of writing a personal narrative. Or maybe you're studying something in science or social studies. So you're learning about biographies by reading about important people in a period of history. So you're reading biographies or you're reading about a period of time, the Civil War. And so it's focused study. So you read a lot of things that related to that time, and then you write about that period of time. Fifth grade, I used to teach Once Upon a Time, and we used to do a huge unit around the pioneer days. So we read Little House on the Prairie together. We journaled from the perspective of Laura Ingalls Wilder. We became part of that lifestyle. And we dressed up and we went out and made mashed potatoes and candles and all sorts of things and soap on a big culminating unit. But it was a deep, focused unit of study. And we did a lot of writing and reading in that time. And then, of course, we talked about the importance of publications or publishing. So that comes, there's a rituals. You have a routine, and maybe that routine is your author's chair, where you share some piece of something that you wrote. But if kids know that you're going to be sharing every single day, they look forward to it. Just like routines in the early years in the preschool, kids thrive on routine. Well, writing workshop has its routines as well. And you have to have high expectations and make the environment safe for kids, which means that you do have structure. And it's a managed period of time. It's not a free for all. Go write, kids, and come back. That's not a writing workshop, although there is a lot of freedom. So what you see over here is an example of something that I used to do in research before I came to the university. And notice this balance between independent reading and independent writing. So on one side, you are reading. I mentioned you do a lot of reading. You build your reading routines to build the writing muscle through quick writes and brainstorming and read alouds. That through all of those reading activities, you build your muscle by studying, the craft of writing. I was looking for water, but it must be in the kitchen. So you're studying how writers do the work, communicate their message through their craft, through something we call mentor text. We'll talk a lot more about mentor text later in the semester, through what we call a think aloud. That's where the teacher thinks through the process. I wrote this piece because, and this is what I was thinking. I think this is where I want to change some words because these are more expressive, et cetera, et cetera. Through close reading, that's where you study pieces of writing to find out what the author's trying to say and how they're doing it by annotating the text. And through discussions of literature. And that's why we do literature circles, for example. That takes us more into the area of writing craft lessons. That's where you use your writer's notebook. Again, think alouds and guided writing. So what's guided writing? This is where you are writing with students and guiding them through the process of developing their own piece of writing. That leads us into this time period of independent writing, where where kids might get feedback through the peer conferences or teacher conferences, through reflections. And notice I'm touching upon all those things that we've just introduced. The reflection is their own self-assessments, setting goals, and the evaluations that they receive and that they do of their own writing. It's really important that their evaluations are not just things that somebody does to them or for them. And then, of course, the publishing for authentic purposes, so in audiences. So notice all of these things are part of what makes a balanced literacy workshop. It's reading and writing. And I don't have the book here, but there's another book that I highly recommend. I use it with my graduate students, and Ellen Keene talks about a writer's, a literacy studio. And I want you to think about this. I think of a writing workshop as being a studio. When you are cooking with your family, or you learned how to do something, wood shopping, sewing, quilting, how did you learn how to do it? You immersed yourself in the task. You work right alongside somebody who knows how to do it better than you. I learned to cook my mother didn't teach me lessons on cooking. She just threw me in the kitchen and I cooked with her. That's how I learned how to cook and make the famous family spaghetti restaurant, or the enchiladas that my Aunt Nana used to make for us. Because she was my mentor. And I learned her technique and her craft, and we just cooked a lot. And then we served dinner to somebody. So I think of the writing workshop, that was a workshop, a cooking workshop. Writing is taught in that same way. I encourage you to think about it that way. So here we go back to that sense of beliefs that we talked about. What are your beliefs about writing, reading and writing instruction? What are your experiences with writing? All of those things inform who you are going to be as a teacher. Some of you recognize that you don't want to be what you experienced. You want to grow from that. So I'm thankful that you're in this class and hope you'll walk away with something that will help you feel stronger about becoming a writing teacher. We're doing blogs in this course. And one of our first blogs is going to be writing a poem that we're going to do together, and I'll introduce that next week. But the important thing about the writing that we're going to do in blogs is that you're going to experience this whole cycle of the writing process. And I'm going to do my best to take you through all the stages and help you walk away with a feeling of what does it mean to be an author? Because although many of you wrote papers for college, or papers for high school, and you were definitely authors, I'm not wanting to take anything away from that. You were writing for school. I want you to write for yourself and for an audience of peers. We talked about this recursive nature of the writing process, so I won't review this slide. But again, I want you to remember that writing instruction is student-centered, and it is based on a classroom that has a strong culture or sense of community, and it's up to you to develop that. So there are 10 tenets of a good or student-centered writing classroom. Remember, the teacher is a writer, and that you are teaching the writer, that you're teaching students. You're not teaching writing. Although you are teaching standards of writing and you are teaching kids how to write certain types of writing, the emphasis is on the student and not the writing itself. That will come when you are paying attention to what the writer can do. You write with your kids. You tell them why they're doing this. It's not just writing because you're supposed to, and the curriculum says that you're doing it. You're looking at skills that they can transfer and strategies that they can use. So the transferable skills come from the mentor texts and the strategies that you will teach them to be able to write a good thesis statement, for example, or a good conclusion. It's all about the things that they want to write, and you're building their voice. That's not to say it's a free-for-all. You give them choices within choices. It's kind of like that idea of my daughter who did not like to wear dresses when she was very, very young. And I'd say, okay, no problem. Which one do you want to wear, the red dress or the blue dress? But she picked her dress. But the fact is she had to wear a dress. Well, you're going to be writing an essay. So do you want to write about an essay about your vacation, an essay about a memory of something that was a holiday, but you've given them lots of different ways to get to something that is meaning, because it has to be meaningful to them. You write for real audiences and you give them lots of examples, your mentor texts, and you differentiate because no two writers are the same. And never, ever forget to share your writing because that's what the community does. And if you can build these different beliefs and senses of what it means to teach writing, it'll take you a long way, but it'll take time to perfect and feel comfortable with. And don't forget that you write with students. I believe that this video that I'm going to play here is already in our assignments for today. So I'm going to skip this one slide. And the last thing I want to show you here is that how do we assess writing? Well, and how do you know what good writing is? Those are important things. Well, here we have voice. There's something called the 6 traits of writing. You might have heard about that when you were in school, but it's pretty well generally recognized that a lot of our writing rubrics and even the star writing, when we had it before, now that we've moved to constructed writing, these things still apply, but maybe you don't see those terms as much. But they involve being able to have a main message and it's all your ideas is about the message. Are you communicating a message and supporting it with good content? That's your ideas. Is the writing well organized, which is your structure? Do you have a voice or a personal tone, or can you haven't you ever read a piece of writing and you go, oh, I know who wrote that because I can hear their voice? Word choices is having a strong vocabulary evident in the writing, not writing that sounds stilted because you found a bunch of big words. It has to be authentic. It has to sound appropriate to the writer, to the piece, and to what that grade level should be using. Sentence fluency is the rhythm and the flow. You don't want it to be choppy and you don't want it to be too long. You want it to have a good sense of flow. Conventions, of course, is the mechanical correctness, your grammar and your spelling. And then your presentation is, how does it look at the end after all of this? And presentation was added many years later because we recognize that we can present our writing in many different ways. Digital technology has done that for us. So these are different ways that elements that you teach explicitly, but also that you teach that it's writing is assessed. And why is that blank? I have no idea. So chapter 2 talked about the writing environment. And I think there's some tips right here when we want to think about what your writing environment should look like. So think about where the furniture in your classroom is. I'm posting these things here because your blog posts and your final are all going to ask you to refer back to a lot of these ideas that are in the book that I'm kind of highlighting for you, that hopefully you highlighted for yourselves when you were taking notes. Think about where your kids are going to meet. Where are your writing centers? Do you have writing centers? What's in your writing center? What are your mentor texts? Do you have a whole collection that's set aside just for teaching writing that you can also give to kids to be able to read on their own? Do you have deep content learning, make the focus spots of what you're going to have kids writing about? Do you have classroom displays like anchor charts and mentor author boards and inspiration boards? Do you have a place where you just work on work in progress? Do you have a place just to have conferences, whether it's with the teacher or for peers, to for students to work with each other? Is your environment inviting? Does it meet the emotional needs of the students? What does the lighting look like? Is it really bright? I used to turn off I used to have two light switches and I could turn off one. Because I felt like the lights in the room were really harsh. I've seen teachers bring in gels to create a sense of mood lighting or something that helps make this feel warm and so not the harsh lights that many of our institutions have. I even had the custodian come in and change out the light bulbs, and they did it for me. A safety net, a place for students where they feel safe. And what happens when they're going through problems? How do they get help? What do they do? Does your environment foster engagement and confidence? Do you create a set of standards where students feel comfortable buying into the standards and actually contribute to what they believe is good in the writing and good in the classroom atmosphere? Do they help you with the rules for the class writing workshop? Notice I asked you what makes a good protocol for discussion. I'm asking you to buy into this, what we have to do. The classroom libraries, do you have one? What's in your classroom library? What are the rules? How do kids interact with your classroom library, with their supplies, with their writing folders? Do they exist? And do you create a distraction-free environment? Sometimes when I go and tour classes, schools, I'll see signs outside that say, "We are writing right now." And I actually, when I was a classroom teacher, I used to have, when we're writing, I expect anybody that crosses the threshold into my classroom is writing too. And I had an administrator from central office come in because I used to come see my classroom all the time. And he walked into the classroom and I said, "Well, welcome, we're writing." And I handed him a piece of paper and a pen, and he sat down and he wrote, and he actually shared the story. So chapter 3 is about a community of writers. So you're going to see, I'll show you our posts in just a second that you're going to be writing about. And I want you to think about some of these quotes. To firmly establish a community of writers, students will need daily time for uninterrupted writing, time to talk about their writing processes, time for the writerly conversations, time for conferring and collaboration and reflection. Notice all of those elements we've already talked about in the presentation earlier, but the key is time. We can't rush kids through writing. And if we don't give them extended periods of time just to write, we're shortchanging them. Something else is that concept of teachers as writers. I referenced that already. And So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, and I'm not going to go into the 5 pillars of reading. You're going to get into this next week when we go deeper into the guided reading and what makes good the concepts of teaching reading. So I hope that that was a nice review of the materials that you already read in the book. I hope you're enjoying the book. Send me a note, an email, and tell me, what are you thinking? Are you liking? Do you like this book? How's it going for you? And let's get back to some of the things that we have in our table of contents for today. So that was our review. You're going to read chapter 3. And after reading chapter 3, you're going to, which is all about building community in the writer's workshop. This is going to be much like the last set of discussions. First of all, you're going to be asked to watch 2 videos. Okay. So first, it's 3 parts. First, think about a time when you felt like you were a part of a community. Take 10 minutes just to write about that experience and what it felt like and what it meant to you. Post your writing on the discussion board. In that discussion, then after I want you to read this or watch these 2 videos. And now I want you to think about the importance of building a community in a writer's workshop. It is important for teachers of writing that we ourselves spend time writing. Think about your own writing community. What works? What do you still crave as a writer? And I want you to write again for about 10 minutes about that, and think about how are you going to make your writers feel safe, and what will you do to build a community. Feel free to research ways to build community in your classroom. But so this is about 20 minutes to complete this discussion. Whether you do it in parts where you post one and then you watch the videos and then you reply to yourself or post again, it's up to you. Just use that discussion space. You're going to post your initial discussions by Friday, so you don't have to have read the chapters yet. You just need to get started thinking about this concept of building a community in your writer's workshop. Oops, let's get back to where we were. I think I lost my spot. So sorry, I'm showing you. Okay, here we are. Okay, so that's this first discussion. And then you're also going to look at something by Friday where I want you to just peruse this concept of websites. Okay, so let's go to this discussion post. And I just want you to do a quick exploration. We're gonna be blogging, but we're gonna be posting our writing to our blogs. And you need to get started with the blog. Some of you may have already been into blogs. I've had students where I already have a blog. So this is what I do. This is my blog. This is how it works. I give you some resources like Blogger, EduBlogs, WordPress, LiveJournal, etc. That's just one thought. There are others. The world of blogging keeps evolving. So I just gave you a small list to get started. I want you to also think, well, maybe instead of a blog, you're going to do a podcast. So look at different types of podcasts, such as Podbean, Studio at Your Fingertips, etc. And look at all of these resources. You might be in and out of this as you go through the process of creating your blog or your podcast. But I want you to take an initial dive and share what you are discovering with your peers, because you might say, this one is really cool, I like this, and tell them why, or stay away from that. That one's not working quite right. Or what have you learned about blogging or podcasting? So the posts that you're going to put in this week's discussion is just an exploration. That's all it is. Which websites or apps do you think you'll use for your blog or podcast? If you already have an education related blog site, you can use that as well. So tell us what that is. Why did you select it? If you already created a site, share the link so that you know where to find you. You will eventually be sharing your links with your blogs or podcasts. We'll probably put those on the Padlet because it'll be easier for us to go in and out of those. But this is where you can just have a good chat about this to get us started. So this is the work that you're going to do by Friday. Let me go back and let's go back up here. So the next thing in our tasks and assignments, let me go back up here. it's easier for me to show you where we are to follow in order. You're also going to read chapter 1 in the guided reading workshop book. I talked about how you're just going to be reading chapter 1 together. I want you then to just peruse the book, go through it and think, okay, which one of these chapters do I think is going to be the coolest? Because I'm going to be asked next week to identify that. I can't guarantee, depends on which group is which, but I'm going to try. I really want to give you what you choose. So maybe you'll have a choice 1 and a choice 2 as I shape groups. So notice that Friday is when you have to do these 2 things, and you have until midnight, so you have plenty of time. If for whatever reason, because I am posting this late, you need more time, just let me know that you need a little bit more time, and I'm usually pretty generous with that. But by Tuesday, you should have read chapter 1 or in the reading guided reading book, and chapter 3 in the writing workshop book. And you're going to post initial discussions, and you're going to have posted your initial, all that work about the community, building community. I'm sorry, forgive me, I'm ahead of myself. By Friday, you post your initial response. Then you're going to go and respond and read other people's work and respond to, by Tuesday, what other people have written. And then you're going to post your initial responses to the guided read to the chapters that we read. Let me show you what that looks like, because I changed the prompt. And the reason I do that is because I'm showing you different ways that you can get your kids to engage in discussion about reading. So this time, instead of the 3 big questions, I ask you to write 3 things that you learned from the chapter, write 2 ideas that challenged you. But when I talk about challenge, maybe something you would disagree with, maybe something that you're struggling with the ideas, or maybe you don't fully understand it. Challenge can be taken a lot of different ways. And then write 1 burning question that surfaced from your reading. And then the following week, you'll do your peer responses as well. So that's our work for this week. Again, I apologize for the late posting, and hopefully I can get my act together and get this other big monster that's due in on Sunday, so that I can pay closer attention to all of you. And I look forward to talking to a lot of you next week when I put out a way for us to kind of talk face to face. So have a great week. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And I am going to stop this podcast or this recording because it can ramble on. Until next time, bye-bye.